What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video we're going to be talking about Hardware Season 1, Number 6 by Brandon Thomas and Dennis Cowan. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down how Edwin Alva has created the ultimate weapon to shut down Hardware. And we're also going to talk about how Hardware Season 1 foreshadows Tiffany Evans becoming Technique, as well as how Milestone is setting up their own version of Batman v Superman in the form of Hardware v Icon. And I'm going to tell you why Hardware v Icon isn't going to go the way a lot of people think. We're going to talk about all this and more right now, but first, let's hit that intro.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
I didn't do a video covering Hardware Season 1, Number 5, but what I can basically tell you that you know to kind of get into this issue is that Hardware, working with one of his former and also one of Edwin Alva's former associates, Sim, this led to Alva unleashing a missile strike on Hardware and Sim, believing that Sim had thrown in his lot with Curtis Metcalf. This led to Hardware having to struggle and literally hold off an entire building falling down on top of him, literally being buried alive. Hardware was able to save both his life as well as Sim and his associates, but in return, Sim is offering Curtis something that is going to be instrumental in taking down Edwin Alva. Sim knows where all the bodies are buried. He's a guy who knows a lot about Edwin Alva, and while Curtis Metcalf could take all of this information and use it against Edwin Alva, we gotta remember at the end of the day, Curtis is a whole black man who is also being demonized by the very man who he wants to lead out of the shadows and into the light. David Sim is an outside party, someone who is not connected to Curtis in any meaningful way beyond being former associates at Alva Industries. He's moved on from that life and has created his own corporations, and he is someone who, in the eyes of the public, would be a neutral party to both people, considering the public fallout between Sim and Edwin Alva and the lack of a relationship between Sim and Curtis Metcalf. Sim is an instrumental piece on the chessboard that Curtis can use against Alva and shut down everything. Combine this with everything that Professor Baraki Young and Dr. Tiffany Evans have brought to bear against Edwin Alva, and then everything else that Hardware can bring down just himself. This is really the only way they're going to be able to bring Edwin Alva down a peg. Because as we learned in Icon and Rocket Season 1, Number 6, Alva has already put together his own secret cabal called The System, an organization of the world's most underground criminals, and maybe even a few supervillains in there as well, to try and take back control of not only the international drug trade, but also all the other criminal enterprises, bringing them all together under one umbrella. When Hardware comes to take the fight to Edwin Alva, in the previous issue, he's taken down by a string of what I initially thought were maybe EMP blasts, but they're apparently some kind of a signal that Alva had developed that can shut down any piece of technology that ever came out of his organization. And since Hardware's suit is made from technology that was cultivated at Alva Industries, this shuts down his suit and makes him a sitting duck for Alva's henchman, Reprise, a character we talked about in my video for Hardware Season 1, Number 4. This is a guy who is, for all intents and purposes, Milestone's version of Jamie Madrox, the Multiple Man. He is a guy who can create tons and tons and tons of copies of himself, literally being an army of one. These copies all share his ability to fight and his knowledge of weapons and training, and in the original Hardware series, he gave Hardware a run for his money and was his literal first villain. But in this, Reprise is going to meet a Curtis Metcalf who isn't at 100% full capacity. The signal that Alva used to shut down his suit, while he was still able to transfer some power through it and was able to carry on in the fight against Reprise, he's working off of a limited power supply, and with how many duplicates Reprise is able to create, he's quickly draining Hardware's power. Hardware can only hold out for so long, but Hardware being a man of science and able to think on the fly, he was able to figure out exactly what Reprise's weakness was, that every time Reprise makes a copy, each one is comprised of less mass than the original, and every copy after the first has even less mass than the one that came before. meaning that all he has to do is look for the one that's the thickest and heaviest of them all. And he figures it out, breaking them down until he's reached the true reprise. And while Edwin Alva's security forces are more than ready to take down Hardware, considering that he's completely burned out all of the power reserves in his suit to the point that he literally can't even move in the suit, it's too heavy for him, he has to exit the suit. What we see him walking around and isn't just him walking around in his birthday suit. This is actually a polymer shell that is pretty much bulletproof. Now, it's not as bulletproof as the actual armor itself, but it does allow him to take bullets to the face that he leaves completely uncovered. While in the armor, it keeps it safe, and any other pieces of himself that are exposed from the armor, those aren't in any danger as well. It's basically a way for him to have protection without having the suit, for situations just like this. And while Alva's security forces are pulling up on him and trying to take him down before he can reach Alva, it's actually here that we get a taste of what's to come in terms of Tiffany Evans. Now, for those unfamiliar, in the original Milestone run, Tiffany Evans was the character Technique, a character who was a villain at first to Hardware, but in this instance, she's actually his girlfriend in this version of Milestone's Dakotaverse. Only in this instance, she's not already a superhero. She doesn't have a special suit of her own. She actually goes to Hardware's childhood home, where he also kept some of his other Hardware gear, and it's here she reveals she has access to one of the Hardware suits, at least parts of it, taking a pair of the Hardware suit's gauntlets and its helmet and using it to help him get past Edwin Alva's security. Now, once again, this isn't her being Technique proper, but it's definitely giving those who are fans of this character, people who are, new fans, and also people who are fans of the original version of the character, giving kind of a best of both worlds where, she's not Technique here, but letting you know that Milestone hasn't forgotten about that character. And Tiffany isn't the only one who gets to have a little bit of business. Hardware's ex-girlfriend, Baraki, she gets to have a little bit of business here too. Now, while she doesn't get to use any of Hardware's gear, she does get to use her brain and her wit, tricking Alva into thinking that she's having some kind of a panic attack, and him being someone who is a rich white man and not wanting anyone to think, especially Hardware, that he has done anything to her, because he doesn't want to give Hardware any extra ammunition to work with. This actually sets Baraki up to get a gun off of one of his security guards and showcases that Baraki knows how to use that thing. Now, the battle between Edwin Alva and Hardware goes about the only way it can and the only way it ever should. Alva's not a fighter, he's more of a cerebral assassin, and in this case, he doesn't have anything on Hardware anymore. Hardware's already overcome the worst of things Alva could throw at him. He overcame Alva, setting him up for the Big Bang and ruining his career, and Hardware even overcame a little bit of PTSD after being buried alive. The only thing Curtis has to fight back against is whether or not he wants to kill Edwin Alva, which ultimately he doesn't do. Now, whether that was because the police stepped in and arrested Edwin Alva after Sim made charges against him, or because this was actually the plan, that remains to be seen. But Curtis Metcalf's name has been cleared, Alva has been arrested, he is going to be facing charges, and Curtis is in the wind. Now, we do know that he has made his presence known to Deke and his family, the young boy who he inadvertently got caught in the crossfire when the police were chasing after him when he was trying to escape Alva's security forces and the Dakota police. Deke was hospitalized, but apparently he's fine, he's okay, and as penance for what he did, he wanted to reach out to Deke's family and try to make things right, to make sure that their son was okay, and to try to assure them that he would do everything in his power to make sure nothing like this ever happens to him again, or anyone else for that matter. Now, while we had already known about Deke's father, I do have a feeling we'll end up seeing Deke's mother again soon, or at least, I don't know, that kind of seems the way this is going, as she does introduce herself to Hardware when he meets with her to check in on Deke, and her name is revealed to be Sharia Marshall. Now, this is a character I'm not terribly familiar with. If they actually come from the original Milestone comics, I don't remember this character from the original Milestone comics, but I do feel like this is someone we should probably get more familiar with, as I don't feel like they would have spent this time introducing this character if they weren't going to use them for anything down the road. That said, it's actually his introduction to this character and his checking up on Deke, realizing that Deke is in fact okay, that sets us up for what's to come in terms of what I feel is Milestone's version of Batman v Superman. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that I think that they're going to do some drawn out arc where they're going to make Hardware try and fight against Icon, but there's a scene that we see at the end that's eerily similar. A scene one could say is replicated from Batman v Superman, where Batman, as Bruce Wayne, looks up in the sky and sees Superman flying overhead, whereas with Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne, he looked up at Superman with a scowl on his face, resenting the fact that a Superman exists. Whereas in this case, he doesn't really seem to be scowling at Icon when he sees him fly overhead. Even after Deke muses about how he thought that Hardware and Icon were familiar with one another and how basically all these superheroes are just coming out of the woodwork now, and even talking about how Icon isn't even human. What I think is actually setting up here, I do think this is setting up Icon and Hardware, and while I do think it'll probably go the way most superhero meetings go, I mean, at least typically, it's always some deal where two superheroes meet, they have to have a misunderstanding, they have to fight for a little bit before they realize that they're on the same side, and then everything works out in the end. Though I do feel like Milestone is really good about subverting expectations like that, and I feel like, while yes, they are setting up a Icon, or rather Hardware v Icon type of a deal, I feel like that meeting isn't going to go exactly the way a lot of people think. I think, yeah, maybe they will have a bit of words with one another, but I do feel like they would realize they're on the same side pretty quickly, even without having to come to a fight. Though, as comics are wont to do, they'll probably still frame it as a Hardware versus Icon type deal. But yeah, I also feel like with the character Rocket and also the character Static being around, I feel like they would also be in on this whole thing as well, and also help contextualize this whole thing so it doesn't have to be some kind of a stupid fight. If they would just sit down and have a conversation, none of this stuff would go the way it goes with all these comic book sacred cows and tropes that have been around since time immemorial. We don't need superheroes fighting every time they meet each other. Why can't they just meet up, hang out, maybe, I don't know, go have a beer, go have a pizza, maybe go to a club, hang out, do something, watch anime together, I don't know, but I just feel like, yeah, that trope of superheroes fighting each other is just tired, and I'm really hoping Milestone doesn't do it here. They haven't done it yet, really, up to this point, so I think it's safe to say this is going to be in very good hands, but we do know that this will be picking up with Milestones in History that's going to be coming out later this month, so we'll find out then. But anyways, that's everything I wanted to talk about regarding Hardware Season 1, Number 6, the finale, and the series as a whole for the most part. I really enjoyed this. It's actually been one of my favorite books coming out of DC, even though technically it's a separate, company. They are under the DC banner. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really good and a nice successor to the original Hardware series, which is also a great series, but I also feel like this one definitely improved on some of the things I didn't like about the original 90s series. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you Hulk smash that like button. Also, make sure you hit subscribe. I do videos like this all the time. I post videos throughout the week breaking down comics and comic book characters, so make sure you hit that notification bell so that way you never miss a single video. And if you want to see more videos about the Milestone Dakotaverse, check out my video here where I'm talking about the new and relaunched Blood Syndicate. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about Hardware Season 1, Number 6, and the entire miniseries as a whole. Keep it plus ultra, and sound off in the comments.